Hi, this is Rick Smith with IT TechSmith, and today we'll be installing Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition. First thing we're going to do is come to visualstudio.microsoft.com, and once you come here, you'll notice that we are given two different Visual Studio downloads. The first one is Visual Studio, and the second is Visual Studio Code. One thing to understand is that Visual Studio here on the left is the full IDE, the Integrated Developer Environment. The IDE is the full development environment that allows us to develop applications for Windows, desktop applications, mobile applications, web applications, whereas Visual Studio Code is more like a powerful script editor. Now, as part of that, we can do web applications, but we can't exactly compile applications for the desktop. So while Visual Studio Code is more lightweight, what we're looking for today is Visual Studio. Now, for Visual Studio, there are actually three options that Microsoft gives us. The first is the Community Edition, which is free to download and use and can be used by anybody. The Professional Enterprise comes with more features, but are paid versions of their program. So what we're going to do today is just download the Community Edition. And run through the setup. Okay, so we'll come down here and get the installer. First thing I'm going to do is go and just close the browser to get it out of our way. Going to hit continue. Now, when we click download on the web page, what it does is brings down kind of a web installer. So it's just a little 3 to 4 meg installer. And as we go through and select our options, the installer will actually download files and components that we need on demand. Okay, so when we get to this point of the installer, what we're going to want to choose is portions or applications that we're going to want to develop for. So for example, these workloads will auto-select multiple individual components that we'll need to develop for various environments. For example, we're going to probably do ASP.NET web development. So we're going to go ahead and hit that one. We're probably going to be doing some MAUI.NET development, so we'll hit that one. Some .NET desktop development. And we'll look at probably some universal web platform development. And what else? Some data storage processing. Now, the other thing you can do is you can come to the individual components and add various components that you need. So if you're developing and learning for existing applications, most likely you'll need to download and pull in and install older frameworks. Now, Microsoft is going to download and install the latest frameworks, and as it updates, it'll leave for example, the .NET 8 framework, and once 9 is there, it'll ask you to update and go to 9, and then you'll have to update your project. But let's say you're working on a project, and that was using the .NET 7 runtime. So you can come in here and hit 7. Now you can come here and hit 6. Now one thing you'll note is it says here long-term support. So long-term support is generally used for companies that need to stay on a longer supported version of .NET that may forego newer features. So Microsoft, rather than putting out features over an extended period of time, let's say there's 3 to 4 years between versions, they're releasing versions more rapidly. But as they release each version more rapidly, they go out of support. And so there's no longer an update, for example, for .NET 5. However, and .NET 7 will eventually go out. However, they will choose a specific version well, they'll give long-term support for. And at this point, version 6 is that long-term support version. You can also come down here and take a look at like 4.8. So one thing to note about .NET 5 and 6, you notice that the name changed. So we have .NET Framework 3.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8. Well, then Microsoft changed the name to .NET Core. So .NET Core was meant to be a multiple OS supporting framework. So it could support Windows, Mac, Linux, whereas .NET Framework could only support Windows. Now, initially they took up the name .NET Core, and then .NET Core 1, .NET Core 2, .NET Core 3. They skipped 4 since 4 was already kind of the last version that was being used with the .NET Framework. And now they've just gone to .NET, and they've dropped the core name and they dropped the framework name. So the latest versions of everything is now just .NET. So I know it's a little bit confusing with the names, but that's just something to note. So that's all we're going to do here. You can change the install location if you need to, but we're just going to go ahead and click with the workloads. You'll see that the total space required is 31.84 gigabytes for the workloads that we've chosen. And we're going to go ahead and install. Now this will take some time to install, as it has to install and download at the same time. So we may go ahead and pause the video here, and we'll come back once everything's downloaded and installed. So at this point of the install, I'm going to go ahead and skip the sign in, but what you want to do is go ahead and sign into your account for Microsoft. That way you can pull down any licenses. The other benefit of signing in is that when you sign into multiple devices and you use Visual Studio, your settings, for example, your themes, some of your configurations, the things that are tailored to how you like to use Visual Studio will roam with you. But for at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and skip this for now. I personally prefer the dark theme, so I'm going to go ahead and use the dark theme. Development settings. So for most of what I do is C#, so I'm going to go ahead and select C# myself and start Visual Studio. Now once Visual Studio gets spun up, we actually don't need the Visual Studio installer page anymore. However, one of the nice things you can do is you can access this Visual Studio installer from the Start menu. So suppose that you might need an additional workload, or let's say additional .NET framework that you did not install. You can pull back up the Visual Studio installer, simply come here to modify. It'll bring up and show you all the different options that you have installed, and you can actually install or uninstall various components from this installer. And we're going to just go ahead and close this Visual Studio installer. All right. So at this point, we can go ahead and open up and clone a repository, open a new project, open up an existing project, or just continue without code. So just to open up Visual Studio, I'm going to go ahead and go continue without code. And you can see that we have our what's new that'll consistently show up. So one thing to note too is as you use Visual Studio, just pay attention down here to this lower right hand alert window. It'll let you know when new Visual Studio installs are available. And that's all you need to do to get Visual Studio up and running. I hope this was helpful, and have a great day.